The captivating power of indwelling-sin, wherein it consists, the prevalency of sin, when from itself, and when from temptation, the rage and madness that is in sin. The third thing assigned to this law of sin and its opposition to God and the law of grace is that it leads the soul captive. Romans 7 verse 23, I find a law leading me captive, captivating me unto the law of sin. And this is the utmost height which the apostle in that place carries the opposition and warning of the remainders of indwelling sin unto, closing the consideration of it with a complaint of the state and condition of believers thereby, and an earnest prayer for deliverance from it. Verse 24, O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of death? What is contained in this expression and intended by it shall be declared in the ensuing observations. Number 1. It is not directly the power and actings of the law of sin that are here expressed, but its success in and upon its actings. But success is the greatest evidence of power, and leading captive in war is the height of success. None can aim at greater success than to lead their enemies captive, and it is a peculiar expression in the Scripture of great success. So the Lord Christ, on his victory over Satan, is said to lead captivity captive, Ephesians 4 verse 8. That is, to conquer him who had conquered and prevailed upon others. And this he did when by death he destroyed him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, Hebrews 2 verse 14. Here then a great prevalency and power of sin in its warring against the soul is discovered. It's a war is to lead captive, which had it not great power it could not do, especially against that resistance of the soul which is included in this expression. Number 2, it is said that it leads the soul captive unto the law of sin, not to this or that sin, particular sin, actual sin, but to the law of sin. God, for the most part, ordereth things so, and gives out such supplies of grace unto believers as that they shall not be made a prey unto this or that particular sin, that it should prevail in them and compel them to serve it in the lust thereof, that it should have dominion over them, that they should be captives and slaves unto it. This is that which David prays so earnestly against in Psalm 19, verses 12 and 13. Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me, then shall I be upright. He supposes a continuance of the law of sin in him, verse 12, which will bring forth errors of life and secret sins against which he finds relief in pardoning and cleansing mercy, which he prays for. This, saith he, will be my condition. But for sins of pride and boldness, such as all sins are that get dominion in a man, that make a captive of a man, the Lord restrain thy servant from them. For what sin soever gets such power in a man, be it in its own nature small or great, it becomes in him in whom it is a sin of boldness, pride, and presumption. For these things are not reckoned from the nature or kind of the sin, but from its prevalency and customariness, wherein pride, boldness, and contempt of God doth consist. To the same purpose, if I mistake not, praised Jabez in 1 Chronicles 4 verse 10. O that thou wouldst bless me indeed, and enlarge my coast, and that thy hand might be with me, and that thou wouldst keep me from evil, that it may not grieve me. The holy man took occasion from his own name to pray against sin, that might not be a grief and sorrow to him by its power and prevalency. I confess sometimes it may come to this, with a believer, that for a season he may be led captive by some particular sin. It may have so much prevalency in him as to have power over him. So it seems to have had been with David when he lay so long in his sin without repentance, and was plainly so with those in Isaiah 57, 17 and 18. For the iniquity of his covetousness was I wroth, and smote him. I hid me and was wroth, and he went on frowardly in the ways of his heart. I have seen his ways, and will heal him. They continued under the power of their covetousness, so that no dealings of God with them for so long a time could reclaim them. But for the most part, when any lust or sin doth so prevail, it is from the advantage and furtherance that it is God by some powerful temptation of Satan. He has poisoned it, inflamed it, and entangled the soul. So the apostle, speaking of such as through sin were fallen off from their holiness, says, they were in the snare of the devil, being taken captive by him at his will, 2 Timothy 2, verse 26. Though it were with their own lusts that are served, yet they were brought into bondage thereunto by being entangled in some snare of Satan, and thence they are said to be taken alive as a poor beast in a toil. And here, by the way, we may a little inquire whether the prevailing power of a particular sin in any be from itself, or from the influence of temptation upon it, concerning which at present take only these two observations. Number 1, much of the prevalency of sin upon the soul is certainly from Satan, when the perplexing and captivating sin has no peculiar footing or advantage in the nature, constitution, or condition of the sinner. When any lust grows high and prevailing more than others upon its own account, it is from the peculiar advantage that it has in the natural constitution, or the station or condition of the person in the world. For otherwise the law of sin gives an equal propensity unto all evil, and equal vigor unto every lust. When therefore it cannot be discerned that the captivating sin is peculiarly fixed in the nature of the sinner, or his advantage from his education or employment in the world, the prevalency of it is peculiarly from Satan. He has got to the root of it, and has given it poison and strength. Yea, perhaps sometimes that which may seem to the soul to the corrupt lusting of the heart is nothing but Satan imposing his suggestions on the imagination. If then a man find an importunate rage from any corruption that is not evidently seated in his nature, let him, as the papists say, cross himself or fly by faith to the cross of Christ, for the devil is nigh at hand. Number 2, when a lust is prevalent unto captivity, where it brings in no advantage to the flesh, it is from Satan. All that the law of sin does of itself is to serve the providence of the flesh, Romans 13, verse 14. And it must bring in unto it somewhat of the profits and pleasures that are its object. Now, if the prevailing sin do not so act in itself, if it be more spiritual and inward, it is much from Satan, by the imagination, more than the corruption of the heart itself. But this, by the way, I say then that the apostle treats not here of our being captivated unto this or that sin, but unto the law of sin. That is, we are compelled to bear its presence and burden whether we will or not. Sometimes the soul thinks or hopes that it may through grace be utterly freed from this troublesome inmate, upon some sweet enjoyment of God, some full supply of grace, some return from wandering, some deep affliction, some thorough humiliation. The poor soul begins to hope that it shall now be freed from the law of sin. But after a while it perceives that it is quite otherwise. Sin acts again, make good its old station, and the soul finds that, whether it will or not, it must bear its yoke. This makes it sigh and cry out for deliverance. Number 3. This leading captive argues a prevalency against the retinency or contrary actings of the will. This is intimated plainly in this expression, namely, that the will opposes and makes head, as it were, against the working of sin. This the apostle declares in those expressions which he uses in chapter 7, verse 15, verses 19 and 20. And herein consists the lusting of the Spirit against the flesh, Galatians 5, verse 17. That is, the contending of grace to expel and subdue it. The spiritual habits of grace that are in the will do so resist and act against it, and the excitation of those habits by the Spirit are directed to the same purpose. This leading captive is contrary, I say, to the inclinations and actings of the renewed will. No man is made a captive but against his will. Captivity is misery and trouble, and no man willingly puts himself into trouble. Men choose it in its causes and in the ways and means leading unto it, but not in itself. So the prophet informs us in Hosea 5, verse 11, Ephraim was not willingly oppressed and broken in judgment. That was his misery and trouble. But he willingly walked after the commandment of the idolatrous kings which brought him thereunto. Whatever consent then the soul may give unto sin, which is a means of this captivity, he gives none to the captivity itself. That is, against a will wholly. Hence these things ensue, number 1, that the power of sin is great, which is that which we are in demonstration of. And this appears in its prevalency unto captivity against the actings and contendings of the will for liberty from it, had it no opposition made unto it, or were its adversary weak, negligent, slothful, it were no great evidence of its power that made captives, but as prevalent against diligence, activity, watchfulness, a continent renancy of the will, this evinces its efficacy. Number 2. This leading captive intimates manifold particular successes. Had it not success in particular, it could not be said at all to lead captive. Rebel it might, assail it might, but it cannot be said to lead captive without some successes. And there are several degrees of the success of the law of sin in the soul. Sometimes it carries a person unto outward actual sin, which is its utmost aim. Sometimes it obtains the consent of the will, but is cast out by grace and proceeds no further. Sometimes it wearies and entangles the soul that it turns aside as it were and leaves contending, which is a success also. One or more or all of these must be where captivity takes place. Such a kind of course does the apostle ascribe unto covetousness in 1 Timothy 6 and verses 9 and 10. Number 3. This leading captive manifests his condition to be miserable and wretched. To be thus yoked and dealt with against the judgment of the mind and the choice and consent of the will, its utmost strivings and contendings, how sad is it! When the neck is sore and tender with former pressures, to be compelled to bear the yoke again. This pierces, this grieves, this even breaks the heart. When the soul is principled by grace unto a loathing of sin, of every evil way, to a hatred of the least discrepancy between itself and the holy will of God, then to be imposed on by this law of sin, with all that enmity and folly, that deadness and filth wherewith it is attended, what more dreadful condition? All captivity is dreadful in its own nature. The greatest aggravation of it is from the condition of the tyrant unto whom anyone is captivated. Now, what can be worse than this law of sin? Hence the apostle, having once mentioned this captivity, cries out as one quite weary and ready to faint. Romans 7 verse 24. Number 4. This condition is peculiar to believers. Unregenerate men are not said to be led captive to the law of sin. They may indeed be led captive under this or that particular sin or corruption. That is, they may be forced to serve it against the power of their convictions. They are convinced of the evil of it. An adulterer of his uncleanness, a drunkard of his abomination, and make some resolutions that may be against it, but their lust is too hard for them. They cannot cease to sin, and so are made captives or slaves to this or that particular sin. But they cannot be said to be led captive to the law of sin, and that because they are willingly subject thereunto. It has, as it were, a rightful dominion over them, and they oppose it not, but only when it has eruptions to the disturbance of their consciences. And in the opposition they make unto it is not from their wills, but is a mere acting of an affrighted conscience and a convinced mind. They regard not the nature of sin, but its guilt and consequences. But to be brought into captivity is that which befalls a man against his will, which is all that shall be spoken unto this degree of the actings of the power of sin manifesting itself in its success. The fourth and last degree of the opposition made by the law of sin to God, and the law of his will and grace is in its rage and madness. There is madness in its nature, Ecclesiastes 9 verse 3. The heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart. The evil that the heart of man is full of by nature is that indwelling-sin whereof we speak. And this is so in their heart that it rises up unto madness. The Holy Ghost expresses this rage of sin by a fit similitude, which he uses in sundry places, as Jeremiah 2 verse 24, Hosea 8 verse 9. It makes men as a wild ass. She traverses her ways and snuffs up the wind, and runs whither her mind or lust leads her. And he saith of idolaters, and rage with their lust, that they are mad upon their idols, Jeremiah 50 verse 38. We may a little consider what lies in this madness and rage of sin, and how it rises up thereunto. Number 1. For the nature of it, it seems to consist in a violent, heady, pertinacious pressing on the evil or sin. Violence, importunity, and pertinacity are in it. It is the tearing and torturing of the soul by any sin to force its consent and to obtain satisfaction. It rises up in the heart, is denied by the law of grace, and rebuked. It returns and exerts its poison again. The soul is startled, casts it off. It returns again with new violence and importunity. The soul cries out for help and deliverance, looks round about to all springs of gospel grace and relief, trembles at the furious assaults of sin, and casts itself into the arms of Christ for deliverance. And if it be not able to take that course, it is foiled and hurried up and down through the mire and filth of foolish imaginations, corrupt and noisome lusts, which rend and tear it, as if they would devour its whole spiritual life and power. See 1 Timothy 6, verses 9 and 10, 2 Peter 2, verse 14. It was not much otherwise with them, whom we instanced in before, Isaiah 57, verse 17. They had inflamed, enraged lust working in them, even covetousness or the love of this world, by which, as the apostle speaks, man pierce himself through with many sorrows. God is angry with them and discovers his wrath by all the ways and means that it was possible for them to be made sensible thereof. He was wroth, and smote them. But though it may be this staggered them a little, yet they went on. He is angry and hides himself from them, deserts them as to his gracious, assisting, comforting presence. Does this work the effect? No, they go on forwardly still as men mad on their covetousness. Nothing could put a stop to their raging lust. This is plain madness and fury. We need not seek far for instances. We see men mad on their lusts every day, and which is the worst kind of madness. Their lusts do not rage so much in them as they rage in the pursuit of them. Are those greedy pursuits of things in the world which we see some men engaged in, though they have other pretenses, indeed anything else but plain madness in the pursuit of their lusts? God, who searches the hearts of men, knows that the most of things that are done with other pretenses in the world are nothing but the actings of men mad and furious in the pursuit of their lust. Number 2, sin rises, not unto this height ordinarily, but when it has got a double advantage. First, that it be provoked and raged and heightened by some great temptation. Though it be a poison in itself, yet being inbred in nature, it grows not violently outrageous without the contribution of some new poison of Satan unto it in a suitable temptation. It was the advantage that Satan got against David by a suitable temptation that raised his lust to that rage and madness which it went forth unto in the business of Bathsheba and Uriah. Though sin be always a fire in the bones, yet it flames not, unless Satan come with his bellows to blow it up. And let anyone in whom the law of sin arises to this height of rage seriously consider, and he may find out where the devil stands and put in the business. Secondly, it must be advantaged by some former entertainment and prevalency. Sin grows not to this height at its first assault. Had it not been suffered to make its entrance, had there not been some yielding in the soul, this had not come about. The great wisdom and security of the soul in dealing with indwelling sin is to put a violent stop unto its beginnings, its first motions and actings. Venture all on the first attempt. Die rather than yield one step unto it. If through the deceit of sin or the negligence of the soul or its carnal confidence to give bounds to lust's actings at other season, it makes any entrance into the soul and finds any entertainment. It gives strength and power and insensibly arises to the frame under consideration. Thou hast never had the experience of the fury of sin if thou hast not been content with some of its dalliance. Hadst thou not brought up with this servant, this slave, delicately, it would not have now presumed beyond the sun. Now when the law of sin, in any particular, has got this double advantage, the furtherance of a vigorous temptation and some prevalency formerly obtained, whereby it is led into the strengths of the soul, it often rises up to this frame whereof we speak. Number 3, we may see what accompanies this rage and madness, what are the properties of it, and what effects it produces. First, there is in it the casting off, for a time at least, of the yoke, rule, and government of the Spirit and law of grace. Where grace has the dominion, it will never utterly be expelled from its throne. It will still keep its right and sovereignty, but its influences may for a season be intercepted, and its government be suspended by the power of sin. Can we think that the law of grace had any actual influence of rule on the heart of David when, upon a provocation received from Nabal, he was so hurried with the desire of self-revenge that he cried, "Gird on your swords," to his companions, and resolved not to leave alive one man of the whole household? 1 Samuel 25, verse 34. Or that Esau was in any better frame when he smote the prophet and put him in prison, that spake unto him in the name of the Lord? Sin in this case is like an untamed horse, which, having first cast off its rider, runs away with fierceness and rage. It first casts off a present sense of the yoke of Christ and the law of his grace, and then hurries the soul at its pleasure. Let us a little consider how this is done. Deceit and residence of grace is in the whole soul. It is in the inner man. It is in the mind, the will, and the affections, for the whole soul is renewed by it into the image of God, Ephesians 4, verse 23 and 24. And the whole man is a new creature, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 17. And in all these doth it exert its power and efficacy. Its rule or dominion is the pursuit of its effectual working in all the faculties of the soul. Is there one united principle of moral and spiritual operations, so then the interrupting of its exercise, of its rule and power by the law of sin, must consist in its contrary acting in and upon the faculties and affections of the soul, whereon and by which grace should exert its power and efficacy. And this it does. It darkens the mind, partly through innumerable vain prejudices and false reasonings, as we shall see when we come to consider its deceitfulness, and partly through the steaming of the affections, heated with the noisome lusts that have laid hold on them. Hence, that saving light that is in the mind is clouded and stifled, that it cannot put forth its transforming power to change the soul into the likeness of Christ discovered unto it, which is his proper work, Romans 12, verse 2. The habitual inclination of the will to obedience, which is the next way of the working of the law of grace, is first weakened, being cast aside and rendered useless by the continual solicitations of sin and temptation, so that the will first lets go its hold, and disputes whether it shall yield or not, and at last gives up itself to its adversary. And for the affections, commonly the beginnings of this evil is in them. They cross one another, and torture the soul with their impetuous violence. By this way is the rule of the law of grace intercepted by the law of sin, even by imposing upon it in the whole seat of its government. When this is done, it is sad work that sin will make in the soul. The apostle warns believers to take heed hereof, chapter 6, verse 12. Let not sin, therefore, reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lust thereof. Look to it, that it get not the dominion, that it usurp not rule, no, not for a moment. It will labor to intrude itself under the throne. Watch against it, or a woeful state and condition lies at the door. This then accompanies its rage and madness of the law of sin. It casts off, during its prevalency, the rule of the law of grace wholly. It speaks in the soul, but is not heard. It commands the contrary, but is not obeyed. It cries out, "Do not this abominable thing which the Lord hates," but it is not regarded. That is, not so far as to be able to put a present stop to the rage of sin, and to recover its own rule, which God in his own time restores to it by the power of his Spirit dwelling in us. Secondly, madness or rage is accompanied with fearlessness and contempt of danger. It takes away the power of consideration, and all that influence that it ought to have upon the soul. Hence sinners that are wholly under the power of this rage are said to run upon God in the thick bosses of his buckler. Job 15, verse 26. That wherein he is armed for their utter ruin. They despise the utmost that he can do to them, being secretly resolved to accomplish their lust, though it cost them their souls. Some few considerations will further clear this unto us. Oft times, when the soul is broken loose from the power of renewing grace, God deals with it to keep it within bounds by preventing grace. So the Lord declares that he will deal with Israel in Hosea 2, verse 6. Seeing thou hast rejected me, I will take another course with thee. I will lay obstacles before thee that thou shalt not be able to pass on, whither the fury of thy lust would drive thee. He will propose that to them. from without that shall obstruct them in their progress. These hindrances that God lays in the way of sinners, as shall be afterward at large declared, are of two sorts. First, rational considerations, taken from the consequence of the sin and evil that the soul is solicited unto and perplexed with. Such are the fear of death, judgment, and hell, fallen into the hands of the living God, who is a consuming fire. Whilst a man is under the power of the law of the Spirit of life, the love of Christ constrains him, 2 Corinthians 5 verse 14. The principle of his doing good and abstaining from evil is faith, working by love, accompanied with a following of Christ because of the sweet savor of his name. But now, when this blessed easy yoke is for a season cast off, so as was manifested before, God sets a hedge of terror before the soul, minds it of death and judgment to come, flashes the flames of hell fire in the face, fills the soul with consideration of all the evil consequences of sin, to deter it from its purpose. To this end does he make use of all threatenings recorded in the law and gospel. To this head also may be referred all the considerations that may be taken from things temporal, as shame, reproach, scandal, punishments, and the like. By the consideration of these things, I say, does God set a hedge before them. Secondly, providential dispensations are used by the Lord to the same purpose, and these are of two sorts. Such as are suited to work upon the soul and to cause it to desist and give over in its lustings and pursuit of sin. Such are afflictions and mercies, Isaiah 57 verse 17. I was wroth, and I smote them. I testified my dislike of their ways by afflictions. So Hosea chapter 2 verses 9, 11, and 12. God chastens men with pains on their bodies, saith he in Job, to turn them from their purpose, and to hide sin from them. Job 33 verses 17 to 19. In other ways he has to come to them and touch them, as in their names, relations, estates, and desirable things, or else he heaps mercies on them, that they may consider whom they are rebelling against. It may be signal distinguishing mercies are made their portion for many days. Secondly, such as actually hinder the soul from pursuing sin, though it be resolved so to do. The various ways whereby God does we must afterward consider. These are the ways, I say, whereby the soul is dealt with. Afar, the law of Indwelling-Sin is cast off for a season, the influencing power of the law of grace. But now, when lust rises up to rage or madness, it will also contemn all these, even the rod in him that has appointed it. It will rush on shame, reproaches, wrath, and whatever may befall it. That is, though they be presented unto it, it will venture upon them all. Rage and madness is fearless. And this it does in two ways. First, it possesses a mind that it suffers not the consideration of these things to dwell upon it, but renders the thoughts of them slight and evident. Or if the mind do force itself to a contemplation of them, yet it interposes between it and the affections, that they shall not be influenced by it in any proportion to what is required. The soul in such a condition will be able to take such things into contemplation, and not at all to be moved by them. And where they do prevail for a season, yet they are insensibly wrought off from the heart again, by secret stubborn resolves to venture all upon the way wherein it is. And this is a second branch of this evidence of the power of sin, taken from the opposition that it makes to the law of grace, as it were by the way of force, strength, and violence. The consideration of its deceit now follows.